Hello, this is Jean Marie Ward for BuzzyMultimedia.com. With me today is the multi-award-winning author of The Forever War, as well as many other novels, stories, and poems, Joe Haldeman. Thank you for joining us here today, Joe.
I'm glad to be here.
Good. In 2008, Ridley Scott acquired the rights to The Forever War. In 2010, the script was in its fourth revision. Where is the project now?
Well, they don't tell me. I'm just the author of the book. You know, I have no inside track at all. In fact, I find out about it when fans write to me.
Oh my goodness.
Website, you know, people who live in Hollywood know a lot more than I do. In fact, I found out about the new revision. We were at a cocktail party, which was not a science fiction cocktail party, but just a thing in LA, and somebody had heard from her hairdresser, who heard at her yoga class that Scott was doing the Forever War. I thought, well, it's got to be true.
I have seen it on various places on the web that he waited 25 years to get the rights.
Well, yeah, but that's the fact is somebody else had them, and he had to wait for the contract to run out.
Oh, I understand that, but the idea that somebody would wait 25 years to get the rights, and to a book that now is 35 years old, that's amazing. I mean, the idea that something would have that kind of resonance over time is absolutely wonderful. What do you think is the secret to the book's longevity?
Well, in a way, it's the prototypical modern science fiction war story. And the science fiction military novel, or military science fiction novel, is now a large subgenre.
Mm-hmm.
It was not at the time that I wrote the book. People talk about the book being a response to Heinlein's Starship Troopers. And it was not intended as such, but in fact, if you looked at science fiction at the time, there was Starship Troopers, and there was Bill the Galactic Hero, and there was Gordy Dixon's The Dorsai Cycle. Mm-hmm. And they formed a sort of primitive kind of universe of military science fiction, and I added mine to it. Mm-hmm. What mine added was the anti-war sensibility that came from the Vietnam era, and so it wasn't just a novel of heroic behavior.
And I think that sensibility resonates with the small wars we've been fighting ever since.
Yeah.
So, but it's not. It's only one in 4 works related, correct? As I understand it, Forever War, Forever Peace, Forever Free, and A Separate War? Do I have that right?
Well, no, A Separate War. Well, let me see now. When I wrote The Forever War, I said I would never write a sequel to it, because I thought it was a complete novel. And then I wrote a novel called Forever Peace, which is unrelated to The Forever War. It looks at some of the same questions, but from a totally different viewpoint. Then I got a contract from Robert Silverberg to write a novella, which was an extension of The Forever War. Well, that became the novel Forever Free. And so that is a 2-novel sequence.
Short story.
There's a short story coming out which is called Forever Bound. Mm-hmm. That is a prequel to Forever Peace. Mm-hmm. So the thing is getting almost impossibly complicated.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it. But you've got some other works coming out very soon.
Yeah.
Would you care to talk about that?
Well, I wrote a novel called Mars Bound several years ago. And when I finished it, I realized it needed a sequel. And as I was writing up the proposal for the sequel, I realized it had to have 2 sequels, so it became the first book of a trilogy. So I wrote Mars Bound, and then I wrote its sequel, Starbound, And I'm finishing it up with the novel Earthbound, which I just mailed in a few months ago. It'll be out in December of this year.
And Starbound, when is that the one coming out in December, or?
Well, Starbound is out in hardback. I think it's out in paperback now. But Earthbound is the last one, and that'll be out in December.
Very, very cool. We may be seeing you here next year with one of the nominations, right?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
When I arrived here at Nebula Weekend, the first thing I asked was, how did the Nebulas get from a banquet to a whole weekend with stuff, including tours in the D.C. area, seminars? You know, it's practically a convention. And when I said, who can tell me about this transformation, they said, you have to talk to Joe Haldeman. So could you please give me how did it happen? How did we go from a banquet to a convention?
It was on its way to happening when I became president. I believe the year preceding my presidency, it was already a weekend.
What year was that?
1989, 1990.
Okay,
sure.
We're talking significant past, yeah.
And then I had it for 2 years, as I was president for 2 years. And 1 year was up in Washington State, Oregon. And the next year was in New Orleans, which was fun. And by the time I left, it had become sort of a long weekend deal with programming on 2 days. And now I believe there is programming on 3 days. And God knows how long it will be before it's all year round, you know, you just never leave.
Oh, yeah, the forever weekend.
Yeah, right. But I should say, now let me expand on one little thing. Because
please.
When we started going, and my wife is here and she'll correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that there was just the Nebula Awards banquet. And then at some time in the 70s, I believe, they started adding some programming that day before the banquet. And then probably somebody says, well, we're paying all this money to go to whatever city for 1 day and then coming back home. So why don't we just make it 2 days? It's not that much more expensive to stay in New York for 2 days, and then we'll have more programming and more exposure and so forth. And I suppose that was the logical process. I don't see, SIFWA does not have like a scrapbook or anything that keeps an institutional memory going. Big mistake, but it's kind of late to start now, I guess.
Well, it's never too late, especially not while people like you can remember what it was before.
Or attempt to remember.
Well, yeah, but you've got a lot of notes squirreled away. I've seen your website. You've been taking notes for a long, long time. Okay, we mentioned Marsbound, Starbound, and Earthbound. What else is on your horizon?
Well, right now I'm working on a novel called Work Done for Hire. It's the first novel I've ever written that has a writer as a protagonist. So it's kind of fun that way. It's automatically autobiographical in certain regards. And automatically kind of sarcastic in certain ways too, because you can't be deadly serious about writing.
No, not if you're a writer, that's for darn sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Is there anything you'd like to add that I haven't covered here? About your poetry, about your painting?
Yes, one should write poetry and paint pictures. No, I started out as a poet. I wrote poetry for a long time before I ever wrote a story. And I think that writers of fiction could benefit from studying and writing poetry. It gives you a sensitivity to individual words and to phrases and to the music of the language, which is disregarded, I think, at your peril if you want your work to last longer than a season.
The word matters, absolutely. Where can your fans find you on the web?
At my website, anybody who Googles Joe Haldeman, in quotes, so it's one word, the first thing that comes up is my website. Yeah, and I have a daily diary on sff.net, which is mirrored on LiveJournal. The one on LiveJournal is actually better in a way because I can put pictures on it, and I do draw and paint and so forth, and I put my pictures up for all to enjoy.
So that would be joehaldeman.com/livejournal.com?
I am not sure.
The other way around.
I find it just by going, in quotes, Joe Haldeman LiveJournal.
Okay.
And it's the first thing that comes up.
That's good. And that's where they can find your paintings.
Yes.
Any place else?
On my website, I've got several. I've sold a couple through my website, and wow, who would have thought?
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you for watching.